One of my favorite things about this whole life thing is that oftentimes what feels like the most unassuming experience actually leads us to the most important people in our lives or the most abundance that we experience. And that is exactly what happened to me back in 2018 when I was looking for a new house to live in Denver, Colorado with my best friend Helena. And on this random day, we were going to view different houses that we were potentially going to move into with another roommate. And Helena brought along her high school best friend, Vivi, who's today's podcast guest. And Vivi has now turned into one of my very best friends in the whole world. And I'm so grateful for the fact that Helena brought along Vivi into my world on this day that we went and visited a house that we didn't end up moving into, because from that point moving forward, Vivi and I had the opportunity to continue to get to know each other better and better back in Colorado. But ultimately, she ended up moving out to New York City to pursue getting her PhD, which you'll hear more about in this podcast episode. And in our time together here in New York City, we have just been able to explore so much together in terms of psychology and spirituality and all of these different concepts that we talk about here on That's So Rich. And it's truly been such an honor to be able to go on this quest for treasure, which we will talk about on today's podcast episode as well with Vivi, because being on a journey of becoming the happiest, healthiest, and best version of yourself with somebody so closely on the same path has been one of the most inspiring and expansive things that I've done. And I feel so grateful that I've had that within my friendship with Vivi, my friendship with Helena, and other people in my life. And so on today's podcast episode, I wanted to bring Vivi onto the show, not only because she is such an inspiration in my life, but also because she did a TED Talk around a year ago. So it was September of 2023. And this TED Talk is called Life is a Game of Bullshit. This is how you win. And her TED Talk went viral. It ended up receiving around 620,000 views on YouTube thus far. And honestly, she's just such a badass. I have listened to the TED Talk so many times, and I feel so grateful for the fact that I get my own personal little TED Talks from Vivi on a daily basis. But I wanted to bring her on because she has such a unique perspective of how you can play this game of life and truly get the most out of it. So on today's episode of That's So Rich, like I've mentioned, I have the honor of interviewing one of my very best friends, Miss Vivi Gregorich. She is a PhD candidate at Columbia University here in New York City and is also launching her own business, which I'm so excited to share more about with y'all once it is officially launched, because I know that all of you are going to be obsessed with it and want to know how to get in on it as well. But I highly suggest, once you've listened to this podcast episode, go check out Vivi's TED Talk on YouTube. I've left the link down below in the show notes for you to watch it. And if you're wanting to connect with her further, I've also listed her Instagram handle down below so that you can have a conversation with her. Let her know what you like about her TED Talk, what you like about this podcast episode, and so that you can get in touch with her for all of the incredible future things that she has coming up. But without a further ado, here is Life is a Game of Bullshit, and this is how you win. What's up, and welcome to the That's So Rich podcast, the show that's redefining wealth and helping you manifest a life that is rich in every single way. I'm your host, Kat Kozad, transformation coach, manifestation expert, and spiritual guide, and together we're going to create your happiest, healthiest, and wealthiest life. I'm so happy you're here. Let's do this thing. Alrighty, guys, welcome back to another episode of That's So Rich. This is the first guest interview we've had since the rebrand of the podcast, and it felt so fitting to bring my best friend Vivi onto the show to chat with y'all today, because if there's anybody who has inspired me in the past few years to really own different parts of myself and step into more of who I am. It's Vivi. And thanks for coming on to the show today, Vivi.
Oh my gosh, it's such an honor. I've been waiting for this day my whole
I
life.
know.
Real
We've
life.
honestly been talking about this forever, so it's about damn time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Absolutely. Okay, so for the listeners, just give us like a little bit of who you are, the journey that has led you to like who you are today and the work that you do in the world.
Absolutely. So, like Kat, I'm from Colorado originally. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and a lot of my life growing up was just playing competitive sports. I that was pretty much my entire life. Was trying to get a college scholarship for doing that and fell just short of that goal. Didn't really get into the colleges I most wanted to, but ended up playing Division III basketball and softball at a small school in Minnesota called McAllister, and finally decided that academics were at least somewhat important to me and that there was something I could get out of school. And so got really into economics there and found out that's kind of how my brain worked. So decided I wanted to pursue that and doing something where I could think deeply about the social world and why things happen the way they do and how different forces interact between people and the systems that we live in. So I ended up going to the Federal Reserve to work as a research assistant for a couple years in Washington, D.C., before starting my PhD in strategy or study kind of related to economics. I study organizations, dynamics within and between them at Columbia Business School now. And yeah, that's been a really, really great journey, and I'm excited to see where it takes me.
Dude, it's literally so crazy to me. Like, even just listening to you say that, because I know so much about you, but like to hear you talk about the path that you took and the way that your brain works, because it's so different than the way that my brain works. But coming from like such similar experiences growing up. And so I wanted to have you on the show today because it's about a year since you did a TED Talk at Columbia. And this TED Talk inspired me so much. And I know it inspired so many other people. It's called Life is a Game of Bullshit. This is how you win. So, like, tell us about your experience of like doing the TED Talk and what that was like for you to formulate the idea of life is a game of bullshit.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Yes, it is about a year ago, and it feels so much longer ago. It feels like we're in a weird time vortex. But yeah, so I guess a couple years ago, I got really nervous because I'm trying to be a professor one day, and I'm so bad at public speaking. Like, I'm nervous being on this podcast, talking to you, like one of my best friends in the world. So it's like I need to do something about this, and decided to go to a like really intensive workshop where you develop public speaking skills and all that. But I was even nervous for that, even the workshop. So I decided 2 months ahead of time I needed to come up with a good idea for whatever speech I was going to be asked to make at that workshop. So I was on a walk with my mom, and we were just really thinking deeply about like, what is my message? What's something unique? What's an angle that's unique that I have on the world? And I was always like a big competitor growing up, obviously in sports, but also in card games and board games. And I was always trying to find that sneaky way to beat the system and to win the games. And so one of the games I got the best at, because it's simpler. It doesn't sound like chess. You don't have to like spend years studying it. But it's the
Yeah.
card game BS or bullshit or bologna sandwich. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the game, but I developed a kind of counterintuitive strategy for that game growing up, and always loved playing it. So my mom helped me come up with the idea to make it into a talk because I realized how much it actually did apply more broadly to a way of life and how it helped me with like a big transformation in my own life that I'm super grateful for.
Totally. I love that so much. And so for everybody who's listening right now, just like a little sneak peek into Vivi's TED Talk, we'll link it down below so that you can listen to it. But in the talk, she talks about how prior to developing this strategy or prior to really seeing how you could use all of the cards in your hands to live an abundant life, she was kind of playing a game of bullshit in life. So tell us a bit about that, Viv. Like prior to like who you are right now and the work that you're doing in the world right now,
How do you feel like you viewed like the world and how to get the most out of it growing up?
That's such a great question. I think as a kid, I was really obsessed with the idea of fairness and
Mm-hmm.
like things being fair, and because I love to play games and thought it just messed up the game 100% if it wasn't like fair in some way. And I would get really upset when things weren't. And honestly, like whether I was right or not and my perception was right or not at the time, I felt like things were unfair, whether it was like how my basketball coach was treating my teammates or me or something else. And that kind of just put me in a place of you're not going to like win from just doing things the right way, and the world's not going to treat you right from doing that. So you got to be sneaky, you got to be clever, you got to learn how to kind of have the right image, and that's how people win in this society. And so I kind of developed that. And then it was compounded by I played 4 sports in high school and then 2 sports in college. And it's just an extremely busy schedule. So when I'd
Mm-hmm.
approach like school or something, my whole mentality on that is which assignments do I need to do that actually contribute to my grade
Mm-hmm.
versus like which ones can I cut because I literally don't have enough time in the day. And so what happened was I ended up not reading a lot for like a lot of my classes because reading doesn't directly translate to your grades. And I would just figure out how to like collaborate. It was almost a rush to live that way and to like pull it off, and kind of like my whole life a game, and kind of enjoyed that and even took pride in my skills of living that way.
Totally, 100%. And I know that you and I have talked about this, but again, for the listeners, like I was the same exact way growing up. I was like, how can I do as little as possible to get the result that I want? And like, I cheated in every single class that I had growing up. I don't think I read a single book in high school. Like, I go back and look back on like all of the things that we were supposed to do, and there wasn't a single one of them that I actually read, but always figured out a way to be able to get an A in the class. And like, I think I graduated with a 3.85 GPA, which I'm like, that's fucking hilarious given how little I actually did. So, do you feel as though that's still an approach that like you use today?
No, no, I can almost confidently say it's like completely reversed. Like now
Totally.
I'll forgo, like I love reading now. We can talk more about that if you want, but like I like just even on that note, like I'll forgo doing things I like legitimately need to do that day to like read a book. That's gonna kind of just expand how I think about things. So that's what I say that this TED Talk kind of encapsulated a like really major transformation in my life and like how I see and approach absolutely everything.
Tell us just like, because obviously I want everybody to go listen to the TED Talk, but like give us like an overall gist of what the TED Talk is about so that people can understand the shift that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So the game of bullshit, or the card game BS, you think, I mean, it's called bullshit. It's literally about how well you can lie and how, pull things off without being detected and keep your poker face and all of that. And that's what it looks like the whole game's about if you don't think about it too much. But the idea of the talk is kind of almost seeing through the game itself a little bit. And there's actually a kind of counterintuitive strategy that I present in the talk. I won't get in too much here, but like where you can do something that looks like it hurts you. Basically, you like call bullshit on other people when you don't even think they're bullshitting to add cards to your hand. And you want to get rid of cards. So it seems like you're doing something bad for yourself, but really you're building up your hand so that you don't have to lie in the future at all. So then you don't
Mm-hmm.
even have to worry about, do I have a good poker face or not? You can just be smug. You're like, I have the cards and I always have the card that I need on the last turn when everyone's going to be the most skeptical of me. So
Yep.
it's a total mentality shift from like, how do I look honest versus like, how do I be honest? And like, then
Mm-hmm.
you be in that game, like being honest literally doubles your chances of winning the game. I haven't actually calculated like how much better or simulated how much better the strategy is, but that was basically my experience is you win twice as often as you're supposed to if you play that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, it's kind of like, whoa, could this be true? Could being honest
Mm-hmm.
actually be the strategy that wins? Like the world doesn't look like that, but
Yeah.
maybe it is. And that's what got me thinking and got me experimenting with a different way of life where now it's more about being present and being like, what knowledge, what relationship, what basically like, yeah, treasure is here for me in this moment that I can pick up and like appreciate and like add to my hand because I don't know what's gonna pay off in the future. And it's not
Yep.
about thinking about what is gonna pay off in the future. It's just about having a handful of experiences and yeah, whatever it may be right now
Yeah.
and just always living in that.
Totally, totally. What came up for me as you were saying that was I think that a lot of times, if we take that same concept of like adding cards to your hand and it feeling like this counterintuitive approach, a lot of times people aren't trying to add more cards to their hands, but they're naturally going through some sort of experience where they're undergoing some sort of hardship or challenge or whatever it may be. And in that experience, although their conscious mind is like, fuck, get me out of this, like they're adding so many cards to their hand so that as they go through the experience of life, they have the card to play when they need it, or like to be able to offer it to other people in this really beautiful way. I know you know, but I've been going through one of the most challenging seasons of my life recently. And it's like, do I really want to be here? No, but I think about like even just in the analogy that you shared of adding cards to my own deck of like, oh, okay, like I have all of these cards that I didn't have before to be able to now present myself in a much more honest, and it's not that it wasn't honest before, but like deeply like rooted place where I'm able to one appreciate what you said, like what is here, the treasure that exists, and honor it for what it is regardless of the circumstance, and two, know that as I continue to move along this path and have more of the cards to be able to move forward, life just keeps getting richer and more treasure keeps presenting itself.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up because the cool thing about this mentality of like searching for the treasure in the moment and adding cards to your hand is that like anything's a card that you add to your
Mm-hmm.
hand. And so it's just about viewing it that way. And it's in fact these things that are kind of the hardest to view that way that feel like setbacks. Like nothing's a setback. It's just a
Yep.
card adding to your hand. And when you see it that way, you just like get a surge of energy because like there's a reason, you know, there's a payoff to absolutely everything. And that's why you don't have to worry about what there's a payoff to and what there's not. And
Totally.
it's all coming together. So I think especially in those like harder times, like you mentioned, seeing it that way is so powerful to like gain resilience. And those hard times, the cards you add to the your hand in the hard times are probably those ones that you're like gonna most need at the quote unquote end of the game, like the
Mm-hmm.
ones that are going to determine your success at whatever you're pursuing.
Totally. Versus like if somebody was just trying to get rid of all of their cards as fast as possible to like rush through the game and get to the winning place, they then don't have the cards that they need to win the game.
Yeah, then you come to the last hand and you put whatever card down you have, and it's not the right card. And everyone calls BS because
Mm-hmm.
they like you're gonna win and they're gonna lose if they don't. And then your card
Totally.
is the wrong card. And that's
Totally.
what always happens if you play that way. But if you play this way where you're, you know, collecting, you're almost looking ahead for that, but at the same time being more present and more appreciative of things that you wouldn't have necessarily seen as assets,
Yep.
then you're going to be fine on that last round. You get to be the smug one that's like, no, I have the right card. You know, no, I am the person to be in this room. I'm the person to be doing this job. I am the person. And that true confidence comes from it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like I feel like our society has such an obsession with like how quickly you can get from point A to point B versus like how much can you gain from the journey between point A and point B. And if you were to just stay at point A, like could you actually find the enjoyable experience of being there and find the treasure of being at point A? That's this game is such a good analogy for it. So for you, like what has been some of those experiences that's like given you a lot of these cards that maybe you're like, fuck, I don't want these cards.
Yeah. I think like the biggest one, which I kind of bring into the talk because it was so transformative for me, is I had a hard time with some of my high school basketball coaches, just like not seeing eye to eye and not getting along and feeling like I was being treated unfairly in the situations. And it was really heartbreaking because basketball was like everything I wanted for my life. If I could have spent my whole life playing basketball at that point, like I would have.
Yeah.
And so it was the most important thing for me. And it felt like it was kind of slowly getting ripped from my grasp because of these situations. And as soon as I got a little space from that and like continued on my life journey, I get to look back on that experience saying, okay, what did I actually like learn from that? What did I actually pick up from that? And it's really that I kind of compounded on like kind of killing myself in those scenarios because like yes, I had coaches that like didn't really believe in me or see the best in me, but I let it like trigger my own self-doubt and like let it hinder how motivated I was to practice and how motivated I was to really get better at basketball. And so the lesson I take from that is that I need to never let an authority figure or someone else tell me about myself in a way that like affects my own belief in my ability to do something. Because looking back
Yep.
on that situation, it like if I would have kept practicing and kept trying to seek out the rules and wouldn't have let the situation as it was like penetrate my psychology so deeply, like I could have done a lot better. I could have played basketball at a higher level school. I could have kept going with that. And it's like no regrets on that. I don't think it was what I was actually like meant to do. I mean, I'm 5'6" and like not that athletic. So we're gonna let that dream go. But it's just been really helpful in new situations where I feel kind of insecure and like I'm relying on people ahead of me, mentors or authority figures for kind of
Mhm.
mentorship or advice to be like, yes, these people can really help me and that's amazing. But also, I need to be careful about how much they tell me what's possible for me because
Totally.
at the end of the day, I determine what's possible for me. And
Yep.
that's been one of the most empowering things. And a card I added to my hand that is I could genuinely say like the reason I made it to this PhD program at Columbia and like the reason I'll make it to the next thing.
Absolutely. 100%. It's like it becomes the quest that somebody else sets you out on and what they think you can accomplish within it versus like you learning how to fine tune your own inner compass to be able to guide yourself wherever you're actually meant to be.
Absolutely.
I love it. Okay, so we've talked about treasure a few times. What would you define as treasure in life?
That's such a good question. I've gotten that a few times since giving the talk, and I think people want like specific answers, like what is it? My
Yep.
answer to it is the more broadly you can expand your mind to include a broader set of treasure, the more you're gonna find.
Mm.
For me
Hmm.
personally, I found it like the insights and perspective changes I gained from books have been like a huge thing. I know I talked about not liking to read and this shift to liking to read. For me, that is just like a game changer. When I look at a book, I'm like, someone put years and years of like intentional thought into
Into
making this
this.
a certain way and making it hang together. And as a reader, you just kind of get to breeze through that and like let
Mhm.
whatever framework they present, whatever story they're telling, expand your mind and make new neural connections in your mind. And like the payoff of that is just so huge. And I think that's a really beautiful one. Another
Yep.
one is just friendships and relationships with family and relationships, period. I think
Yeah.
like it's an infinite portal when you're with anyone, like what could come of that in that moment. And it could be just, an awkward passive conversation, or you could really discover something about yourself or make a friendship that's going to like last a long time in a single moment, just based on how you show up, how open you are, how whatever. So
Yep.
when I think of searching for treasure in a moment, I find that it opens up new levels of depth within my friendships and makes it easier to make connections with strangers and kind of just, I mean, the whole mentality just reduces anxiety. Like I find I just am not worried about like what someone thinks of me or something. And it just, you can leave that all behind and discover what's really there, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I love it too because you're so right. Everybody does want an answer of like, what is treasure? Like, how do we get to the treasure versus being able to, again, like take away somebody else's perception of what treasure is and just cut to the core of what treasure is for you. One of my favorite things is like, I'll text you one day and like, if I don't hear back from you, I'm like, she's probably reading a book. Like she's probably just like so into a book right now and like discovering a whole treasure chest full of like nuggets of wisdom. And like for me, what you said about relationships, I've been asked a lot recently, like if I could do anything in the world, like what would I do? And the only thing that ever comes up for me is like, I just want to spend time in a room with people and like talk to them and like not even have to. I think that a lot of times people are like, oh, and like teach them. And I'm like, no, literally, like just talk to them because I'm literally learning so much and being taught so much from every single conversation that I have, just like you said, whether it be some like passive, awkward conversation that you have with somebody or like a super in-depth one that you have. And I think that, again, in a world that's so obsessed with results and is so obsessed with like how quickly can we get from point A to point B, from this result to the next result, the art of like treasure hunting gets lost in that and puts people in such boxes, myself completely guilty of this as well, is like how many boxes I've put myself in to be like, okay, this is what I must do in order to receive what I'm deeming as treasure right now, aka more money, aka more success, aka more of these things. And it's like, yeah, of course those things are important too, but do you think it's possible that the pursuit for money, success, like all of these like material wealth that people desire to have is actually also incorporated into the treasure hunt of just like exploring what feels good to you?
Totally. Yeah, I think like what you said about relationships has had me thinking more. It's like there's this tendency to even have a subconscious like calculation in your brain of like what's this hanging out with this person like gonna get me, especially if you're like
Totally.
in business or like you're really set on like some professional goals. And like maybe if it's someone younger, not in your field or something, that's like a cost to you versus if it's someone influential who could like get you an opportunity that's like a gain for you. And I think there's
Mm-hmm.
their tendency to think that way. But in reality, you have no idea what relationship's gonna pay off in what way. There like
Yep.
our scopes of like understanding that are just like so
So limited.
tiny. And it's just like, what can you create in that moment with that person, no matter who they are, actually ends up like, it's not just like this is a better way to live morally. It's like literally that's like pays off better. And when you look at the simplified example of like the game of bullshit, it like mathematically pays off better
Mm-hmm.
to do it that way, which is the crazy part. It's like an awesome win-win situation. You get to enjoy the moment more. You get to release your anxieties. You get to, yeah, not live this constant hustle. And then
Yep.
also succeed at the exact goals that you want more.
Yep. In a completely different way than you would have imagined in the first place.
Yes,
Which
totally.
is like the whole concept of manifestation in the first place, which is like, it's so funny because like after teaching this shit for 5 years, I'm like, I still have so often like this linear idea of how things are going to pan out and play out in my head. And then they like never happen that way. And when they're not happening that way, I'm like, ugh, this is like so annoying. Then it's like exactly this, what we're talking about of like, yeah, because there's this like linear model or like box that I'm putting myself in within those things. And to actually the what I saw in my head as you were saying that, it's the difference between like You know how like Eastern medicine and like Eastern principles are so focused on like holistic health and like holistically living versus we've been so conditioned out here in the West to be like, okay, what is the like most probable route if you talk to that person? What opportunity? What like exactly what you said? And bringing it back into this place of like, okay, if the goal is truly to be abundant in every single aspect of your life, then the more diversity that you add to it in your relationships, in your routines, in what you're exploring, in the books you read, the content you consume, they're going to offer new perspective to like fill your treasure chest full of a bunch of different treasure, just as opposed to like if you just wanted rubies in your treasure chest. It's like, sure, you can just have rubies, but like someday aren't you gonna want some sapphire?
Yeah, you're missing out if you're just looking for rubies and not just being open to whatever. Plus, maybe there's gems that you don't even know are worth value. Like society hasn't even put value on them, but then like 100 years later, they become the most valuable gem in the chest.
Whoa, dude. That's such a good point because it's like, yeah, who's to say like what we again societally deem as treasure right now is even going to be treasure in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, like however much time out from right now. And like, yeah, just like beating ourselves into the ground to try and make that shit happen currently
Yeah,
versus exploring.
exactly. So you might as well just focus on what you think is pretty, not worry about what society thinks is great. And also like looking closer at things to see where you can find the beauty that you didn't initially see. Like that, yeah, just following what you're drawn to in the moment and trying to be open to more value, then yeah, because who knows what the future is going to hold.
Totally. Okay, so what's your search for treasure currently leading you towards? What's it been inspiring you to discover more of?
Well, this could be a whole nother this could be a whole like 10 more podcasts.
Great,
So
bring her back.
I feel like the world's kind of like my world's kind of been exploding in the last couple years just with this transformation and just like how much more fulfilled I am and like in the endeavors I'm pursuing. So for me, a lot of the reading I've been doing just about stuff that I find interesting, which is like psychology and like the nature of the universe and stuff. I've been kind of putting together, my own kind of theory of how that works and working with a team to kind of bring it to life in a fun business idea, which I won't give too much away to now. But that's super exciting. It's been definitely the biggest passion project of my life. And I feel like this philosophy is like what led to even discovering the idea for it. And I know I'm being vague, but we gotta wait a little longer for getting
We'll
into
bring her back onto the podcast when she can talk about it.
Yeah, so that's exciting. And then also just the way I view the PhD is like I think it's really easy to be like, I'm not making that much money now. This is hard. I think there's a lot of narratives out there about PhD programs being that way. But for me, it's been a constant like daily practice to view this as like a giant, giant card adding to the hand and like where can I find more? Like where can I really develop a skill or like a new framework that's going to actually change and help how people think about something, and where can I develop my writing skills even when it's just so frustrating to rewrite a paper for the 80th time. This is how I do it. This is how I learn how to express myself through writing in this way, or I would never be able to do that. So just being really grateful for the entire experience and thinking of it more that way.
Yeah, love it. One thing that you really inspire me with is being able to change the way that I see things. And that's something that you've said quite a few times throughout this is like changing the way that somebody sees things or changing the way that you've seen things. Would you say that this game of bullshit has been like the biggest catalyst to help you change the way that you see things? Or like what's been the catalyst to help you shift your perception?
Yeah, that's such a good question because I feel like it's just such a buildup of little things for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but I would say not just the game of bullshit. Like this is a really good example of a like
Mhm.
bigger phenomenon, which is just seeing things as a metaphor for something larger, seeing
Mhm.
concrete things as a metaphor for something larger. I know we've talked about this recently because you hate fruit. You
Yeah,
have some
guys,
fear
I
of,
hate fruit.
sorry to expose you, but
No, I'm
I know
so
you
glad you did expose me.
I know you have some fear of like the texture of fruit and whatever in your mouth and it's uncomfortable. But like it's like little things like that it's like okay, if you just ate fruit, not a big deal. It's just eating a piece of fruit. But if you see that as a metaphor for a way to practice breaking through this avoidance of discomfort, it could
Yeah.
really open up an entire world. And I mean, I experienced that. I used to have a deadly fear of dogs. And like, yeah, it's really annoying to walk around in this world with so many dogs and like be afraid all the time. Like I experienced that as a child, like just being constantly afraid.
Yeah.
And so that's annoying in itself. But it's like eventually, after like 100 failed tries at like petting a dog, like found the cutest dog on the street. It was with my other best friend in Washington, D.C. and chatted with the owner, ended up like holding the dog and going through that first bit of like the exposure therapy on that and like sitting through the initial discomfort. And I think it's just it's about so much more than like being able to be around dogs now. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, now I know what fear feels like, and now I know what the dissolving away of fear feels like. And it's something I
Yep.
learned in my body through that experience. And so now through it, I can now apply that to less physical fears, like the fear of failure or the fear of rejection or something, and know and kind of recognize that feeling of discomfort and the sitting through it and watching it dissolve. So I think it's like
Mhm.
seeing these little things as metaphors for bigger things is just game changing for me.
Yeah, I think that's so huge. I want to like take what you said and reiterate it in a different way is so often, especially I mean, since I've been an online coach, which is the past 5 years, that people look for the solution to what is going to curb their fears or like release their limiting beliefs or heal their traumas through a podcast episode or like through a book or through a seminar or through a teacher telling them something and thinking that like just the mental shift of the experience is what's going to release and remove the actual sensation based reaction you have to it. So like you said, dogs for you, for me, fruit, which is one of them. I literally have had a fear of fruit since I was a kid and like don't like fruit. And I'll eat it from time to time if like somebody's like, here's this thing, like you have to eat it. I'm like, okay, fine. I'm like gonna plug my nose and do it. But to to approach it in this way of like, oh, okay, like that's anytime I don't face that, I'm actively resisting discomfort. And the only way that I can actually overcome whatever discomfort that is stirring up inside of me is doing the thing. And actually, like you said, exposure therapy to it, where it's like starting in these small micro ways, maybe like you said, fear of dogs, just seeing the dog at first, noticing how like much discomfort or fear you're experiencing inside of your body, but like soothing yourself through the process to then petting the dog, soothing yourself through the process to then perhaps a dog has been in your lap now. I don't know. And like that's been it's so interesting for me to look about that in so many ways. There's so many things that I've tackled in terms of fear, but like even just in the fruit analogy that you gave me the other day, guys, we were sitting at a restaurant this weekend and Vivi and one of my other friends, Say, who's been on the podcast before, and I'm sure will be on the podcast again in the future, we were sitting there talking about how I dislike fruit. And Vivi's like, dude, it's just a metaphor. And it literally hit me in the craziest way. Like, so much was happening inside of my body sensationally when she said that, because for the longest time I was like, I don't understand why this is such a big deal to like people that I don't like fruit, specifically to Vivi. I was like, I don't get why she keeps on telling me that I need to eat fruit. I don't want to. She's like, it's just a metaphor for like the discomfort that you're avoiding in your life. And I was like, holy fucking shit, that's so real. I actually bought an apple this morning that I'm gonna eat today, and I will send you a picture of. But I then like this morning, well, it was actually I get lots of messages in the middle of the night. I like was like, okay, so fruit is a discomfort for me. Consistently working out is a discomfort for me. Relationships and like healing anxious attachment to them is a massive discomfort for me. And then like consistently moving through money fears is a discomfort for me. And the more that I step away from those things, the more I'm training my body to say that they're not safe, as opposed to running towards them and getting to shift the way that I see them by facing the discomfort in these little micro moments.
Wow, that's beautiful. You inspire me. You always like, okay, when I realize I need to take something head on, like I do it. And I think that's what's so special about you. And like, yeah, I love that. Something else that this brought up for me is another way that I kind of think about this is the search for treasure, not necessarily as just only seeking out the things that you like or bring you joy or seeing things as opportunities, but also saying, how many experiences in this life can I figure out how to gain joy from? So if it's like
Mm.
fruit, like there's a joy and a pleasure in eating fruit. I think a lot of us can agree on that. And so for someone who doesn't like
Most.
fruit, it's like, oh, you're missing that. And of course it's a tiny thing. Maybe it doesn't,
Yep.
there's plenty of other foods out there. Like, of course it's a tiny thing, but I just like that mentality. I mean, for me, as like I didn't go to concerts or musical things very much. I don't know. Crowds are not always my favorite thing, but recently have just like developed almost the like skill to have so much fun at like a music festival or something like that. And that wasn't something that like I've always been drawn to or always
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed, but just kind of relaxing into the experience, surrounding yourself with the people you need to make that experience great, listening to the music and gaining an appreciation for it beforehand. These were all little things it did to just be like, I'm gonna have the best weekend of my life at this music festival. And that to me is adding a giant card to your hand of like, here's a whole range of things that now I can experience through pure joy instead of having
Mm-hmm.
an anxiety with them. And these are like new
Yep.
things. And then it's just like life just becomes an adventure for that point where fear doesn't really hold a candle to anything you try to do.
Totally. Dude, I've heard you say that so many times, but that time it like hit me differently. Where, yeah, it's like, what are the things that you actively avoid or choose not to do that actually could be the treasure chest waiting to be opened if you were to just approach it from the different lens of like, fuck, I don't want to go into that. And more so like, and I'm going to choose the experience of what I have from this.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to live that way, especially like I also think about it with the days when you need to like go to the dentist or do something you like really don't want to do. It's like, okay, let me challenge myself to like, what do I need to do to make this a good day, even though it has my least favorite activity in it or something like
Yep.
that. And so whether it's like going to get a new treat or try a new bakery while you're down where your dentist appointment is, or whether it's taking an extra hour in the morning to just do something that you love and just puts you off on a good note for the day, that can just kind of drown out or give you a better mindset for like that thing you really don't want to do. And then that's just such
Mm-hmm.
a hack because then your worst days like just are alchemized into
Yep.
potentially your best days. And you really do some soul searching on what makes you happy and what makes you fulfilled within a day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Would you say that the journey of getting to that place of seeing like everything as an opportunity to experience something new or to like find treasure within it was the mental narrative or like the personal narrative that you had surrounding it, was it something that you had to like hype yourself up for, or was it something just that like naturally progressed?
That's such a good question. I feel like it's kind of a mix. I
Yeah.
think for individual experiences, like new experiences, like things that are a little bit scary or new, a first music festival or a trip to a new country or something. I think I do a lot of like hyping myself up. A lot of, yeah, internal hype talks happen a lot in my head. It's not like
Same.
a seamless shift. It's like oh, let me lock in and like get my mind right. But then I feel like there's a really natural and beautiful bleed over between if you do that in one setting, that it becomes much easier in others. And then you get this kind of gradual shift where the new reality kind of just emerges subtly almost. And you look back to 2 years ago, what life looked like, how many opportunities you had, how successful you were at your endeavors, whatever. And then it's just like, oh, whoa, like everything's completely different now. But it happened kind of through that mysterious, gradual mechanism.
Love it. Okay, beautiful. So last question I have for you is what makes life so rich for you? I know we've talked about some of it here, but like what's the richness of life for you?
Wow. This is such a big question and a good one. I think it's really just feeling connected. Like if I had to put it in one sentence, and that means like connected to myself, to all aspects of myself, and to also to others and to the work that I'm doing and stuff. So it's not really about any one individual thing, or like it's more just about a feeling like my soul's in this relationship, or my soul's in this work, or like my soul's in my own body. And then it just everything feels rich. I mean, things that don't cost anything. Like, a walk in Central Park's one of the richest things ever.
Richest.
So, and that's completely free. So, yeah, I would say that.
Beautiful connectedness. I love that. Speaking of connectedness, when people listen to this podcast episode and they're like, oh shit, that girl's cool, I want to connect with her, where can they go to find you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Instagram's great. I go on Instagram way too much.
Same.
So, yeah, it would be awesome, yeah, to make some new connections and friends through this. My Instagram handle is at VVG23.
Beautiful. I'll link that down below. I'll also link Vivi's TED Talk. And yeah, tell us what you like from this podcast episode. Give her some feedback on the TED Talk. It's fucking badass. I listened to that thing when it first came out, probably like 20 times within the first week, because I was just so fucking proud of you. But this will be the first of many of Vivi on the podcast because there's some really cool things in both of our horizons. And just so grateful that you took time out of your day to share your treasure with us.
Yeah, and also just one quick thing about the TED Talk came to mind is that opportunity, I'm convinced, would have never arose if I was like, I want to do a TED Talk because it's a TED Talk. It's like such a perfect like meta example of the whole theory. Like I was genuinely just like, how do I get better at speaking? Like on this
Yep.
journey, like how do I add this card to my hand because it's not there right now? And then it
Yep.
was like through that journey and through a bunch of little mini experiences in that journey that an opportunity that would have never been there for me or for someone in my position kind of arose. So that's kind of
Yep.
let it just
It
mirror.
was it was such a cool manifestation. I remember us going for a walk in Central Park like a few weeks before that, where you had like just gone to your workshop and like we're talking about this cool idea that you came together. And then like a few weeks later, you're like, hey, so I'm doing a TED Talk in September. And I was like, what the fuck? But yeah, it's such a perfect
Yeah.
example of everything that we're talking about of like the path isn't always linear. And if you can just enjoy the present moment and the treasure that's available in that moment to you, whether it be something that is covered by the discomfort that you're currently avoiding or actively is there and it's just waiting for you to like reach out and recognize that you can grab it, it's always there and it's always available. And I'm so grateful that you got to bring this to us.
Totally. And like one last thing is like the work always precedes the opportunity. And we think we're like trying to get an opportunity to do work. But really, if you like write a script for a talk and it's like you make it really good and all of that, like somehow opportunity just appears.
Presents.
versus like trying to get the opportunity first and then do the work. I think, yeah, this is like the search for treasure thing too, is like just do it first. Do what you want to do first. Create the message you want to create and then let it find its way into the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yay. Beautiful. Thank you, Vive.
Thanks, Kat. This was so much fun.